Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest is Joel Jackson, the Senior Director of Emerging Product Sales for Red Hat North America Public Sector Group. Now, Joel, before break, we were talking about this, if you will, the state of DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever we're calling it these days. Right. We brought up this term Kubernetes, which I think is growing in popularity. Is this actually happening, though, in the federal market or in the public sector more broadly? Give me an example, a case study maybe that you can highlight.
Sure. So we can probably even do two of those things. So from the microservices perspective, we've got a couple good ones there. So I would say, without using specific examples, we've got a large metro transit authority in the Northeast, very, very large city that is using microservices to redo their mobile application for how do you even use subways and transportation up there. So they're using a Kubernetes-based solution to give them those guardrails on how to develop in a very quick, and modern sprint, I would say. And in the federal space, we have a lot actually. I'm almost thinking there's not even a cabinet level agency not looking or having invested in a Kubernetes-based platform. We have some really good examples on the, I would say the law enforcement side, if I had to pick a vertical for it, where they've broken their monolithic application into about 2,000 to 3,000 microservices, and they've transformed their agency into a waterfall shop, if you will, into a more agile, culturally agile shop. And that has not been easy. It's, we've probably been on year 3 of that contract working with those guys, but it's absolutely a real thing. It provides a ton of value when you can, push out features to either the warfighter or the citizen in a very fast way. I think we all have experiences on, I wish we could get something faster from our either local, federal or state agencies that we interact with on a daily basis. So Kubernetes is absolutely real. OpenShift is our platform for that, and it's our fastest growing segment of our business.
It seems like 2,000 to 3,000 microservices seems like an awful lot, but maybe that's just on the surface. How does that compare to other clients, other examples?
I think it ranges. Your mileage may vary based on the application that you have, right? So a smaller monolithic application is going to obviously have a lower amount of microservices usually. But the whole point there is that there's no hard and fast rule. There is probably some correlation that can happen if you called us and said, hey, show us your application, and we took a look at it, we can probably give you a rough estimate of what it would entail microservices-wise to break that thing apart.
And that's the benefit of a platform like OpenShift, because it's managing those 2,000 to 3,000.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
I mean, could you imagine if you had, you always talk about, we talk a lot about apps rationalization,
right.
and I just actually recently did a story on a survey from the Fourth Estate within DoD that the DoD CIO and DISA did, and they said, okay, we're going to look at all applications and see where they should go: public cloud, private cloud, mil cloud,
right.
Stay on premises. And one of the big benefits was we realized we had 7 learning management systems across the Fourth Estate.
Right.
And I think
yeah.
no one manages that, but it sounds like this is one of the benefits of using Kubernetes, is this idea of you now know what you have and then you can share more easily.
Well, it definitely forces you to inventory what you have, which is always a big challenge when you get into the scale of DoD or some of these agencies. It is something most people have not seen before. It's not trivial and it's not easy, but yeah, I think once you do that, and again, going back to, if you can at least draw the line in the sand now and say, I'm going to build my new application, so stop doing it the old way now, at least it gives you a new application development platform, so you can do that today, and then spend there's going to be a lot of time figuring out what the lift and shift stuff goes to. But stop the bleeding today as far as doing it the old way. I think you can get a lot of benefits out of just doing that, even if you can't move any of your applications over, which you should be able to. But there's definitely some applications that are probably going to stay in a certain silo for decades even. They just can't move.
Do you get a sense of how many agencies or how many of your clients are truly doing Agile DevOps, or how many are talking about it, but they're still kind of in some kind of hybrid world of waterfall DevOps?
Yeah, everybody says they do DevOps.
Of course. If you go to the IT dashboard, you
right.
can see 70%, 80% of so-and-so's projects are in the waterfall, are out of waterfall. But I've talked to people, and what does that really mean?
Yeah, we have this joke. You can be sold DevOps, but you can't buy it, right? Because there's that's part of the vendor community there too. But I think DevOps is this. It is a cultural change. I would say, from my experience, very few have done it. There are some that are absolutely good at it in the federal space, but most have a different opinion of what it is than when you get in there and show them how, okay, this is the real way to do it. So they have an idea of what it is, but they're really not, they might just apply some automation technology and say, okay, I have DevOps. That's not really, they haven't changed their culture. They haven't, changed the way they've planned for releasing software and, the deployment life cycles.
And when it comes down to it, the goal from your perspective, from a lot of, I think, the people in industry who see this working, you mentioned Netflix, that's a common one that people like to point to as a DevOps culture, is this really does lead to the broader benefit of innovation. I mean, if you can put these pieces in place, the containerization, the Kubernetes, the microservices, all working within a cloud, again, private cloud, public cloud, maybe it doesn't matter, that can lead the path to quicker change and more innovation and better services. And that's the key here.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Netflix is a good example because I like to use it because everybody knows it. They've usually seen it. Most people don't know that it does run 100% on a public cloud. So they've been able to build out and scale out a very broad, large application across a very large user base. But it brings up a good point. When we sell stuff to a customer, if we just let's use a plain analogy here, might make the most sense. We're selling, with OpenShift and these Kubernetes, these technology parts that we keep talking about, we're selling you the ability to build the plane. You still have to know how to build the plane. Right. And sometimes you can come to us or a system integrator will help you build the plane, but then what? You actually have to fly the plane. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think, the confusion on, what DevOps is really takes place. Vendors, we can sell you guys tools all the time, and that, but that doesn't let you become a DevOps, a culture. You haven't changed your culture on how to use that tool set. And the plane analogy is actually a pretty good one because when you toss the keys to someone and they've never flown or even taken lessons to fly a plane, that's kind of dangerous, right? So the same things apply to when you get some very cool technology like Kubernetes platforms, like OpenShift, and some of these other products like Ansible. They're very, very powerful, but someone needs to show you how to fly these planes. Now, whether that's a system integrator or Red Hat itself, that seems to be where it happens with us. We usually go in with a system integrator and we show the customer how to fly the plane.
At the very beginning of our conversation, I brought up this idea of how all this is leading to IT modernization, helping agencies kind of get rid of technical debt, a common term we've heard. Give me a sense of why that, not just the culture change that needs to happen, but why does using these approaches help agencies get out of that debt, help the agencies really provide better services?
Well, I'd probably go back to that one of those points that I made where it just get your new development process onto a more modern platform. Even if you just do that as a federal agency, that's a great starting point. To be able to, bring in a new modern concept, tooling like OpenShift, Ansible, some other products where, coupled along with a DevOps approach is a great way to start a new modern development methodology inside of a federal place. Now, to your point, you have this technical debt still out there. You have these old, applications that may or may not be able to move somewhere. Most likely, I think you'll probably have, maybe the 80-20 rule where you're going to be able to move a good amount of your, monolithic applications to something. But you'll probably still have 20% of your applications that they're just not going to go anywhere. So there's your technical debt, and then, that's agency by agency has their priorities on how they deal with that. Whether they, decommission that and start something up, at the same time. So, they build something at the same time as they're taking down the life cycle of a technical debt application. But I think starting with a new modern platform and getting into the DevOps culture is one of the most important starting points for an agency these days.
And I think we're seeing that happening. Again, it's a slow roll. when you talk to agencies, what's the biggest obstacle to make that change, whether it's a culture change or whether it's a technology change? What do they have to do? What kind of questions do you get from your clients?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. I think, how do they move to a more agile environment when all the rules for them are not on agile environments, right? So I think how do you get around that? And there are certainly ways to do that, because there's some good examples of people doing this.
Well, but I think one of the things that agencies too often, they sit back and go, well, the acquisition system doesn't work, until they are shown the example of an acquisition, of someone using the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and making it work. And I think too often that's an easy, I just can't do it because of the acquisition system.
Yeah, right, I agree. The acquisition doesn't make it easier for them, but it's certainly not, you can certainly get around it, and not get around is probably not the right word. You can certainly get through it.
Work within it.
You can work within it. And it's, I think it is changing though. I mean, all the way top level CIOs, they get it. They want the features out there faster. They don't want a 5-year waterfall process. I think they all understand that. It's just, and it might require a couple waivers that you didn't get before, but that's not usually a big deal these days.
All right. Joel, this has been a great conversation so far. We're just about out of time, but a lot of agencies are listening to this and they're going, okay, great. That's great to talk about it at the 50,000 foot level. What do I need to do? How do I move forward? Because I think, as we've talked about, some agencies are further ahead, some agencies may be further behind. I think you mentioned nearly every federal agency client that you talk with, that you work with, is thinking about or starting to use this idea of Kubernetes containerization. So what kind of advice do you have for them? Where do you see them needing to go, 3-5 years?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice would be, open source is a fast-moving, and it is the de facto development environment now. I mean, there's not a lot of proprietary development going on that is giving you the innovation like Kubernetes and Linux, and you just go down the Hadoop. All those were all those were open source development models that were built. So I would say you can't do it yourself, right? I remember 4 or 5 years ago, we would go talk to these folks that were doing OpenStack, building their own OpenStack. Now they've done that. They've quit that. They buy a vendor. Whether you buy Red Hat or someone else, that's fine. But buy and talk to people that actually know how to embrace and build enterprise features around the open source community. Because what you'll end up doing is, if you try to build on the pure open source community, you'll lock yourself in, and the pace of change is super fast. You won't be able to take advantage of features. So I think get professional advice from a company that knows how to navigate the enterprise open source waters, because it's fast moving and it changes all the time.
One concern I hear once in a while about open source, even after all these years, is still the security side of it. Give me a sense of how you guys address that problem as agencies bring up, well, I don't trust open source, it's insecure.
Yeah, we haven't had that in a long time, but
so
maybe
the trend is gone.
Yeah, I do remember. I've been at Red Hat, 17 years, and I remember. What do you mean people can contribute to the code? It was very different back then, but I think now it is. I think the open source development model it is stamped its way in here, and I think being able to see the code really makes a difference. And you can have auditors, you can pay third parties to go, hey, who else is in this code? So if you think there's a problem with it as a federal agency, you can even get in and experiment and commit to the code as well. So I think that's been handled. Security is something we build into every product that we have. We actually have a security team at Red Hat that also adds extra security to all our enterprise platforms and gets patches out in a very, very timely manner. So I haven't had that question in a while, but I
think it still exists. I was at a conference recently, and I think the open source and security came up again, but maybe that person was been in the business a long time, and they still have some old feelings.
Yeah.
Joel, this has been a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so let me thank my guest, Joel Jackson, the Senior Director for Emerging Product Sales at Red Hat North America Public Sector. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
You've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I've been your host, Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.